The sound of the organ echoed through the church, solemn and grand, as my brother waited at the altar. His face was lit with nervous anticipation, but I wasn't watching him. My eyes were locked on the back of the church, scanning for Jake. My son. My only son. Something was wrong. He had been acting strangely all morning, distant and fidgety, like he was carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. And now, he was missing. I leaned toward Claire, my wife, and whispered, "Have you seen Jake?" She didn't even glance at me, her eyes glued to the ceremony program. "He's probably just outside messing around on his phone," she said dismissively. Before I could reply, the heavy wooden doors of the church swung open with a loud creak. Heads turned in unison. At first, no one understood what was happening. Then I saw him, Jake, standing in the doorway, his face pale, his chest heaving like he had sprinted a mile. But it wasn't his sudden appearance that froze the room. It was what he was holding. The glint of metal in his hand caught the light. A gun. Gasps rippled through the crowd like a wave. My pulse thundered in my ears as I shot to my feet, my legs weak beneath me. "Jake!" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady, but it cracked under the weight of my panic. "Dad," Jake said, his voice loud enough to silence the murmurs but trembling with emotion. "I need to talk to you. Right now." Claire clutched my arm with a death grip. "What is he doing?" she hissed through clenched teeth, her face twisted in horror. Jake's eyes flicked to her, then back to me. His gaze was pleading, desperate. "Just you, Dad," he said firmly. "Come with me. Please." My mind raced. This wasn't the Jake I knew. My son was quiet, thoughtful, a good kid. He wasn't someone who would pull a stunt like this, especially not here. Especially not with a gun. "Jake," I said, taking a cautious step toward him. "Whatever's going on, we can." "Now," he interrupted, his voice breaking. "It's Mom. I have to tell you something about her." I froze. The room felt like it had been sucked of all air. My heart dropped into my stomach as every worst-case scenario flashed through my mind. Claire stiffened beside me, her nails digging into my arm. "Don't listen to him," she muttered under her breath. "He's just trying to ruin the wedding." But I saw the fear in her eyes. Not shock, not confusion, fear. She was hiding something. I took another step forward, my gaze locked on Jake. "Okay," I said quietly. "Let's talk." Without another word, he turned and bolted out of the church, leaving a trail of stunned silence in his wake. I followed, ignoring Claire's protests and the whispers erupting behind me. The second we were outside, Jake grabbed my arm and pulled me around the corner of the church, away from prying eyes. His hands were shaking so badly that he dropped the gun. It clattered onto the ground, harmless and empty. "It's not real," he said quickly, gesturing to the weapon. "I just needed to get your attention. I didn't know how else to." "Jake, what the hell is going on?" I demanded, my voice sharp with panic. "What's this about your mother?" He looked at me, his eyes glassy with unshed tears. "Dad," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "you need to go to the bathroom. She's in there. With him." My stomach turned. "With who?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted the answer. "Her stepdad," he choked out. "I saw them. Together. In one of the stalls. I heard them." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The world tilted on its axis. Jake's words didn't make sense, they couldn't make sense. But the look on his face was raw, pained. He wasn't lying. "Jake, are you sure?" My voice cracked under the weight of the question. He nodded, his lips trembling. "I saw it, Dad. I'm sorry, but I saw it." I staggered back, my head spinning. My wife. My son. My family. What the hell was happening? I wanted to deny it, to tell Jake he was wrong, but the cold pit in my stomach told me otherwise. "Stay here," I said hoarsely, the words barely making it out of my mouth. "I'll handle this." With my heart pounding like a drum, I turned and headed toward the church bathroom, bracing myself for the truth that was about to shatter everything. I approached the bathroom like a soldier walking into battle, every step weighed down by dread. My hands trembled as I pushed the door open. Inside, it was quiet, eerily so. The faint hum of the air conditioner buzzed in the background, and the sterile smell of cleaning products clung to the air. For a brief moment, I thought maybe Jake had misunderstood. Maybe it was some awful mistake. But then I heard it. A muffled laugh. A man's voice, low and familiar, followed by a hushed giggle that made my stomach churn. My blood turned to ice as I recognized her laugh. Claire. My Claire. The sound came from the last stall. My legs felt like they were made of lead as I took slow, deliberate steps toward it, each one bringing me closer to a nightmare I didn't want to face. My mind raced, grasping for excuses, explanations, anything to make this moment less real. Maybe it's not what it seems. Maybe. The door wasn't fully latched. It was slightly ajar, and with a trembling hand, I pushed it open just enough to see. I wish I hadn't. There she was, tangled with him, her stepfather, of all people. His hands on her, her arms around him. The intimacy of the scene was like a knife to my chest, twisting with every breath I took. My vision blurred with rage and disgust as Claire looked up and saw me. Her eyes widened in shock, her mouth falling open, but no words came out. Get out, I growled, my voice low and venomous. The man, Michael, her stepfather, had the audacity to smirk as he adjusted his shirt. Well, this is awkward, he said casually, like he'd been caught sneaking an extra cookie from the jar, not committing the ultimate betrayal. Claire scrambled to her feet, her face flushed. It's not what it looks like, she stammered, her voice shrill and desperate. Let me explain. I couldn't hold back the laugh that bubbled up, harsh and bitter. Not what it looks like. Are you serious right now? My voice echoed off the tiled walls, my anger filling the room like a storm about to break. Michael stepped forward, still wearing that smug grin, and I swear I almost lost it right there. Maybe we should all calm down, he said, his tone patronizing. No need to make a scene. I took a step toward him, fists clenched so tightly my nails dug into my palms. A scene? I hissed. You think this is about making a scene? You're sleeping with your own stepdaughter at my brother's wedding, and you want me to calm down? Claire grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. Stop it. Just listen to me, she pleaded. It's not what you think. I was drunk. He took advantage of me. Michael snorted, clearly unimpressed by her attempt to shift the blame. Oh, come on, Claire. Let's not play the victim here. You've been throwing yourself at me for months. Her head snapped toward him, her face twisting in fury. Shut up, Michael. Months? The word left my mouth before I could stop it. The realization hit me like a freight train. This wasn't some one-time mistake. This was deliberate. Calculated. A betrayal that had been festering under my nose for who knows how long. Claire turned back to me, her expression panicked. No. He's lying. He's trying to ruin us, don't you see? He's always been jealous of what we have. Jealous? I spat, my voice rising. Are you even listening to yourself? You're disgusting, Claire. Both of you. Michael leaned casually against the wall, watching the chaos unfold like it was some kind of entertainment. You know, he said, his voice dripping with condescension, maybe you should have paid more attention to your wife. She wouldn't have needed me if you had. That was it. That was the moment I snapped. Without thinking, I lunged at him, my fist connecting with his jaw with a sickening thud. He stumbled back, clutching his face, but I didn't stop. All the rage, all the humiliation, came pouring out as I grabbed him by the collar and slammed him against the wall. Get the hell out of here, I snarled, my face inches from his. If I ever see you near my family again, I swear to God. Okay, he shouted, raising his hands in surrender. I'm going. I released him with a shove, and he stumbled out of the stall, his smirk finally wiped clean. He gave Claire a lingering look before disappearing out the door without another word. That left just us. Claire and me. She stood there, trembling, her eyes wide and brimming with tears. I can explain, she whispered. But I didn't want to hear it. Not anymore. I turned and walked out, leaving her alone in that filthy stall where she belonged. The ceremony was over, but the real spectacle was just beginning. The church was in chaos when I stepped back into the main hall. Guests were murmuring, their voices a crescendo of confusion and concern. My brother stood frozen at the altar, his fiancée gripping his arm, her face pale. Jake was near the doors, looking at me with wide, questioning eyes, his fear palpable. I gave him a small nod, it was all I could manage. Then Claire appeared. Her hair was disheveled, her face streaked with hastily wiped tears. She had the audacity to fix a composed expression on her face as she walked into the room like nothing had happened. But the eyes of the guests were on her now, and the cracks in her mask were visible. She marched toward me, trying to control the situation, but I wasn't about to let her spin this. "Where have you been?" she demanded, her voice loud enough to cut through the noise. It was a weak attempt at deflecting attention, and it only fueled my rage. I didn't answer her. Instead, I turned to Jake and said, loud enough for the entire room to hear, "Thank you for telling me the truth." A wave of whispers rippled through the crowd like an electric current. Claire's face twisted, her composure crumbling. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her tone sharp and defensive. "You really want to do this here?" I said, my voice cold and steady. The room fell silent, all eyes on us now. "Fine. Everyone should know. My wife," I pointed at her, my voice rising, "was just caught in the bathroom with her stepfather." Gasps erupted, sharp and audible, like someone had shattered a glass in the middle of the church. Claire's face turned red, then pale, as she realized there was no talking her way out of this. "That's not true," she shouted, her voice breaking. "He's lying. Jake, he's confused. He misunderstood." "Enough," I barked, cutting her off. My voice echoed through the church, and the weight of it seemed to stop her in her tracks. "Jake saw everything. I saw everything. Stop insulting us by pretending you're innocent." Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Then, as if flipping a switch, she turned on Jake. "You little liar," she screamed, pointing at him with trembling fingers. "You're just trying to ruin this family. I knew you hated me. You've always hated me." Jake flinched, but before I could step in, he straightened his shoulders and shouted back, "I didn't ruin this family, you did." The crowd was utterly silent now, the ceremony all but forgotten. My brother took a step forward, his face a mixture of confusion and horror. "Is this true?" he asked, his voice trembling. "Claire, is this true?" Claire turned toward him, tears streaming down her face. "You're really going to believe him?" she said, her voice dripping with desperation. "He's just a kid. He doesn't know what he's talking about. I would never." "Stop lying," I thundered, my patience finally snapping. "Stop making excuses. You've been doing this for months, haven't you? While I was working, while I was taking care of Jake, while I was trusting you. You brought this to my brother's wedding, Claire. You couldn't even respect that." She looked at me, her mask of tears and contrition slipping away. What replaced it was something colder, something cruel. "Fine," she said, her voice like ice. "You want the truth?" "Yes, I did it. Because I was sick of you. Sick of this boring life. Sick of being married to someone who doesn't even notice me anymore." The room was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Her words hung in the air, sharp and venomous, like a slap across the face. "I deserve better," she continued, her voice rising. "I deserve to be happy, and if you weren't going to give me that, then someone else would." I stared at her, stunned by the sheer audacity of her confession. She wasn't sorry. She wasn't ashamed. She was proud of it. "Then you're free," I said, my voice hollow. "You're free to do whatever and whoever you want. But you'll do it alone." With that, I turned to my brother and his fiancée, whose faces were etched with shock and disgust. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice breaking. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen." "Neither did we," my brother replied, his voice tight with anger as he glared at Claire. "Get her out of here." Claire opened her mouth to protest, but the look on his face silenced her. The guests parted as I walked out, Jake at my side, leaving her to face the wreckage she had created. For once, I didn't feel the need to look back. The drive home was a blur, my mind a whirlwind of emotions, rage, betrayal, disbelief. Jake sat beside me, silent but tense, his hands gripping his knees like he was trying to hold himself together. The echo of Claire's cruel confession kept replaying in my mind, I deserve better. The audacity of it burned like acid in my chest. She wasn't just unfaithful, she was shameless. When we pulled into the driveway, I killed the engine and sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. Jake finally broke the silence. "Dad. I'm sorry," he said, his voice small, like he was afraid I'd lash out at him. I turned to him, my anger softening for the first time all day. "This isn't your fault, Jake," I said firmly. "You did the right thing. You told me the truth when no one else would." He nodded, but the guilt in his eyes didn't fade. "I didn't know what to do," he admitted. I didn't want to ruin Uncle Matt's wedding, but I couldn't just let her get away with it." "You did the right thing," I repeated, placing a hand on his shoulder. "I'm proud of you." As we stepped into the house, the silence was deafening. The pictures on the walls, the furniture we picked out together, the small details of the life we had built, it all felt like a lie now. I couldn't look at any of it without feeling sick. I was about to head to the kitchen when the sound of tires crunching on the gravel outside made me stop. A car door slammed, followed by rapid footsteps. Jake and I exchanged a glance before the front door burst open, and there she was. Claire. Her face was flushed, her hair still disheveled from the church, but her eyes were blazing with defiance. She marched into the living room as if she owned the place, completely unbothered by the chaos she had caused. "Are you serious right now?" she snapped, throwing her purse onto the couch. "You embarrassed me in front of everyone. Do you have any idea what you've done?" I stared at her, dumbfounded by her audacity. "What I've done?" I said, my voice low and dangerous. "You're blaming me for embarrassing you? After everything you've done?" "Yes, I am," she shot back, crossing her arms. "You could have handled this privately, but no, you had to make a scene. Do you know how humiliating that was for me?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She wasn't apologizing. She wasn't even pretending to be remorseful. She was blaming me for her humiliation. "Humiliating?" I said, my voice rising. "You think you were humiliated? Claire, you destroyed our family. You cheated on me, on us, with your stepfather. At my brother's wedding. And you're standing here trying to make yourself the victim." Her eyes narrowed, and her lips curled into a sneer. "You're so dramatic," she said coldly. "It was one mistake. And maybe if you weren't so boring, I wouldn't have needed to look elsewhere." That was it. That was the moment any lingering trace of love or loyalty I had for her evaporated. "You know what, Claire?" I said, stepping closer to her, my voice steady but filled with venom. "You're right. I am boring. I'm boring because I worked my ass off to provide for this family. I'm boring because I put your needs ahead of mine for years. And I'm boring because I trusted you, even when I shouldn't have. But you're pathetic. You're selfish. And you'll end up alone, because people like you always do." For the first time, she looked shaken, but it was fleeting. Her defiance returned almost instantly. "You think you're better than me?" she spat. "You think you can just throw me out and act like you're the hero? Fine. But don't think for a second that you're taking Jake with you. He's my son too." Jake, who had been quietly standing in the corner, finally spoke up. "I'm not going anywhere with you," he said, his voice steady and filled with a maturity that startled me. "You don't deserve to call yourself my mom." Her face crumpled, the cracks in her facade finally showing. "Jake," she whispered, reaching out to him. But he stepped back, his eyes cold and unforgiving. "No," he said firmly. "You don't get to act like the victim. You ruined this, not Dad, not me. You." Claire's hand dropped, and for the first time, she looked truly defeated. But it didn't last. Her lips curled into a bitter smile, and she let out a sharp laugh. "Fine," she said, grabbing her purse. "You two deserve each other. Have fun living your boring little lives." With that, she stormed out, slamming the door behind her. The house shook with the force of it, and for a moment, the silence that followed felt heavier than anything she had said. Jake sat down on the couch, his shoulders slumping as the tension drained from his body. "What happens now?" he asked quietly. I sat beside him, wrapping an arm around his shoulders. "We rebuild," I said. "Without her." And as we sat there in the quiet of our broken home, one thing became clear to me: the worst was over, but the fight wasn't finished yet. Claire wasn't going to walk away without a fight, and I wasn't about to let her take anything else from us. My revenge wasn't complete, not yet. The next few days were a whirlwind of preparation. Claire might have stormed out of the house, but I knew her too well to believe she was gone for good. The woman was vindictive, and if she thought she could turn this into a power play, she would. Jake and I had to be ready. I met with a lawyer the day after the wedding. I didn't wait for Claire to make the first move. She might think she could manipulate the situation, but I was already one step ahead. I laid everything out: her affair, Jake's witness account, and the public scene at the wedding. The lawyer's face remained neutral, but I could see the wheels turning in his head. "Document everything," he advised. "Keep records of her behavior, her communication, and anything else that shows she's unfit to have custody or a share of your assets. The more evidence, the stronger your case." That night, I sat down with Jake and explained the plan. "I need you to be honest about everything you saw," I said. "This isn't just about what she did to me, it's about making sure she doesn't drag you into her mess." Jake nodded, his jaw set with determination. "I'll do whatever it takes, Dad." We didn't have to wait long for Claire's next move. 2 days later, she showed up unannounced, pounding on the door like a storm demanding entry. I opened it, keeping myself between her and the house. She was dressed impeccably, her makeup flawless, but her eyes were wild, her anger barely contained. "Where's Jake?" she snapped, trying to push past me. "He's not seeing you," I said, my voice calm but firm. "Not until this is settled." "You don't get to decide that," she shrieked, pointing a perfectly manicured finger in my face. "I'm his mother. You think you can just cut me out of his life? You'll regret this, you arrogant." "Stop," I said, cutting her off. "You've already done enough damage. Jake doesn't want to see you, Claire. And honestly, I don't blame him." Her face twisted with rage. "You're poisoning him against me. You think you're so perfect, but you're nothing without me. You don't know how to raise a kid, you barely know how to take care of yourself." I felt the anger bubbling up, but I forced it down. "This isn't about me or you," I said evenly. "It's about Jake. And he's old enough to decide for himself." Claire let out a bitter laugh, her voice dripping with venom. "You think this is over? You think I'm just going to walk away? You're wrong. I'm going to fight you for everything. The house, Jake, every dime you've got. Let's see how tough you are when you're living out of your car." I stepped closer, my voice dropping to a dangerous level. "Do it. Try me. But remember this, Claire, you don't have a leg to stand on. I have witnesses, evidence, and a son who wants nothing to do with you. Go ahead and fight. You'll only embarrass yourself more." Her face paled, but she didn't back down. "You'll regret this," she hissed, turning on her heel and storming back to her car. She slammed the door so hard I thought the glass might shatter. Her tires screeched as she sped away, leaving a cloud of dust in her wake. That night, Jake and I sat down to dinner in a house that finally felt like our own. The tension was gone, replaced by a quiet sense of relief. But I knew this wasn't the end. Claire was a hurricane, and she wasn't going to blow over quietly. Still, I wasn't afraid. For the first time in years, I felt in control. I had a plan, a purpose. And when this was all over, Claire would have nothing left, not her lies, not her pride, and certainly not her control over us. Revenge wasn't just about making her pay. It was about reclaiming what she had taken from me, my family, my dignity, and my peace. And I was going to take it all back, one step at a time. Claire's next move came faster than I expected. 2 days after her dramatic exit, I was served divorce papers. Standard procedure, I thought at first, until I read the details. She was demanding full custody of Jake, spousal support, and half of everything I owned, including the house. The audacity of it was staggering, but it wasn't surprising. This was Claire, arrogant, manipulative, and utterly delusional. My lawyer wasn't fazed. "This is typical of someone trying to bluff their way into a better deal," he said. "But we have the upper hand. Stick to the plan." And the plan was simple: expose Claire's true nature. I had gathered enough evidence to paint a damning picture of her character, her affair, her lies, her neglect of Jake, and I wasn't going to hold back. The first hearing came quickly. Claire arrived with her lawyer, dressed in a sharp suit and wearing her usual mask of composure. But as soon as the proceedings began, it started to crack. My lawyer was relentless, presenting the evidence with cold precision. Photos, witness statements, and even testimony from Jake, who bravely stood in court and told the truth about what he had seen that day in the church. Claire tried to fight back, painting herself as the victim of an unloving husband and a manipulative son. But her lies unraveled under cross-examination, and by the end of the hearing, it was clear who the court believed. The final blow came when my lawyer revealed a surprise piece of evidence: security footage from the church bathroom hallway. It showed Claire entering with her stepfather and exiting disheveled moments later, confirming Jake's account. The judge's expression hardened, and Claire's smug demeanor evaporated. In the end, the ruling was swift and decisive. I was granted full custody of Jake. The house remained mine, along with the majority of our assets. Claire was left with nothing but her pride, and even that seemed to be in tatters. She didn't speak to me as we left the courthouse, her face pale and drawn. But as I walked past her, Jake at my side, I paused just long enough to deliver the final word. "You thought you could destroy us," I said quietly. "But all you did was free us." Jake and I walked out into the crisp afternoon air, the weight of the past few weeks lifting with every step. For the first time in years, I felt truly free. Free from her lies, her manipulation, her poison. And as I looked at my son, standing tall and strong beside me, I knew we were going to be okay. Claire's storm had passed, leaving us to rebuild on solid ground. And this time, there would be no one to tear it down.